Okay. Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies, a program that's about things that are at the corner edge of reality. I'm Dan Hall, one of your hosts. With me is Dave Jinks. We've had some audio difficulties. Dave, am I coming through loud and clear, or
You are
still?
coming through pretty loud and clear, yes. So we'll
That's
cross our
good.
fingers and hope that continues.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, as you know, I used to work in law enforcement, used to work in corrections. It seemed like 1,000 years ago. And I all sorts of interesting stories from people in law enforcement about paranormal things. Some of them had to do with ghosts, some of them had to do with UFOs. So I came across a website, or actually some videos, by a gentleman by the name of Ben Miller, and he was talking about not only law enforcement interactions with the paranormal, but he had a lot of interesting stuff about cryptids and ghosts and other things that we all get into. So we've got him on the show today, and hopefully, if he hasn't got disgusted with all of our paranormal technical problems, Ben, we'd like to welcome you to Anomalies.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
For sure. So, now, I remember reading your Facebook page. You are in Pennsylvania, are you
Yes.
not?
Yes, sir.
You live in a town that has an interesting mascot, as I recall. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I live in Punxsutawney with Groundhog, Punxsutawney Phil,
Yeah.
and
So,
I've actually never went up to see him.
well, yeah, that was my next question. So I wondered if there's anything paranormal about Puxatawny Phil, or that's just kind of a fun tradition for the community.
As far as I know, the only thing paranormal about it is that there's a couple places in the state that try to copy it. Like I
Oh,
worked out east in my career, and there was a town that they tried to copy it to, Limestoneville, I believe, and they had their own version of it. But outside of that, there's nothing real mysterious about Phil,
yeah.
sadly.
How many, I want to know what the lifespan of a groundhog is. I mean, how many Phils have there been over the years?
Officially, they say that there's only been one, but there's been plenty. I don't know how long a groundhog lives, but actually, if you come to the town where they have their it's called Barclay Square, they have a library and a police station there. If you go in the library, they have a bunch of them inside the like a glass case in there that you can see them.
I figured they just, when one dies, they just sneak the other one in and nobody really notices the difference.
Oh, absolutely.
Was Groundhog Day with Bill Murray,
Bill Murray, right?
and who was the lead actress? Andy McDowell, was that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that filmed in that city? Literally, I mean, part of it, do you know?
There was only certain segments that were.
Okay.
Very little of it. In fact, I think the sign that you see, it says, and I'm not even sure where this is at, but there's a sign saying entering Punxsutawney, and I forget what else they filmed, but I think the rest of it was filmed in Illinois or Indiana or something like that. I know they came here. I wasn't living here at the time.
Yeah.
But I know that they Bill Murray came here and saw a bunch of people afterwards.
Okay.
But yeah, we don't have cobblestone streets.
Yeah, I guess
Okay.
there's probably more claim to fame in Puxatawny than Phil. So I also read that you studied psychology at Penn State.
Yes.
Did I get that right? Okay.
Yes.
But you work in the trades, right? Is that?
I used to.
Oh, okay.
I actually just recently switched.
So what do you do for a living now?
I'm currently in a position as a maintenance at a Penn Highlands hospital.
Okay. So all that leads up to the question: how does somebody with that background, Puxatawny Phil, not being part of that, how do you get into the paranormal and all the interesting videos that you do on all kinds of issues that Dave and I just gravitate toward? How did that come about?
Honestly, by accident. I was just talking to my dad about it today. that my very first encounter was dealing with ghosts, and I was 6 or 8 years old, and uh my dad, real dad, passed away when he was around that same age. And so all I knew was my step grandfather. Well, the one day we were all at the pool, swimming at the farm, and I went inside the house by myself. Everyone was else was out at the pool. I went inside to go to the bathroom, and as I went inside, all of a sudden from a back room, no one else was in there, I heard this voice, a male voice, calling out from one of the back rooms for my dad. And at one point, I was terrified. At one point, he told me it was, hey, this is your dad. And like I said, I was terrified. I didn't even respond. I probably went to the bathroom there. But that's, like I said, that's been a while ago. And here, come to, thinking about it, I'm betting, and my dad thinks so too, that my actual grandfather thought I was my dad. So it's kind of sad in a way. But so I started with that, and nothing really, notable happened for a long period of time. And then when I was in college, I was working at a state park here called Parker Dam. And I went out there the one night because I knew there was this one cabin that, I know this sounds like every horror story there is, but I knew that there was, I worked like as a park ranger temporarily there, and I saw all the keys that they had there for all the cabins. Well, there was one set there that didn't, we never rented out, and I never knew what number that was. And when I asked them, they said, oh, that's the cabin out down this road that, is kind of dilapidated. We don't rent it out. Well, I knew where it was after that point, and I went out there the one night, and I come across some weird creature that's where it kind of spurred my love of the cryptid side of it. Because I come home, and to show you how much I was involved in it, the only cryptids I knew of was Bigfoot and Nessie. And I got home, my dad's like, I bet you that's the chupacabra. And it wasn't. I think it actually was a gray, but that's where it drew my interest.
What did it look like, Ben? The creature you saw at the park?
Oh, you want the whole story of what happened there?
Oh,
Okay. I'm fine with that.
Ah,
What went down this there, it was like where the cabin was, there was a cutout for like power lines, if you know how they do in hills,
mhm.
and you had to go down this hill, and you had to cut to your right to get on this dirt path, and there was a cabin back there. And I started walking down there with me and two other people, and I had my flashlight ahead of me, and all of a sudden I shined my light up the path, and I saw something standing, like leaning against the tree on the path there, and it was gray. And I talked back to the people behind me, and I said, did you see that? And they're like, see what? And I said, that. And I showed my light on it, and there it was, still sitting there. And it had on the smaller side of black eyes, no nose, I didn't see a mouth. It was skinny, gray, had the typical like alien kind of head, but the eyes were small. They weren't the big ones. And so I was like, well, let's get out of here. We turned around. They're all ahead of me. And all of a sudden, like I said, typical horror story kind of thing, my flashlight dies. And all of them were like, oh, quit messing with us, and I'm like, I'm not. And I'm sitting there beating on this flashlight to try to get the turn back on. And as soon as I get the turn back on, I swing back around and hear this thing moved up. And so we finally get out to that clearing, and all of a sudden I'm hearing this weird screeching noise coming from the other side of the clearing as we're going up the hill to the car. And then I hear the same thing on the other side where I just saw that creature. And so, yeah, I don't know what it was. It might be one of those things that they're calling crawlers now. I don't know.
yeah,
I don't buy into rakes. Those were made up, but
the crawlers are kind of a new thing in
yeah.
cryptids. So one point of clarification: did the other two people you were with, did they see it?
Yes. Yeah, they saw it.
How did that change? How did that change you? You think?
Well, it started me down the path of learning more and more about these unknown creatures.
Uh,
You know, because like I said before this, all I knew about was what everyone knows about Bigfoot and Nessie.
yeah.
And then to hear about Chupacabra, and I started researching Chupacabra, and I never felt right, because looking at Chupacabra, the real Chupacabra, not the mangy dog, it's there's no doubt in the characteristics of what that is. And this didn't have the spikes or the red eyes or nothing like that. And so, it kind of led me down a path of trying to find what's out there. And then not only that, but you mentioned me being in trade. A lot of times, I would do our jobs that we have, and you go to work like 6 months out of the year and then you're off. And so after a prolonged period of time being off, I started kind of getting depressed, and I was like, I need to do something to keep my mind busy. And so that's when I started my YouTube channel.
Mm.
How long has that been going, Ben?
I was just told the other day by a subscriber it's been 7 years, and I can't believe it's been that long. I would have thought I would run out of material by now.
Evidently not, I guess.
Nah, because I have what was it, the 35th episode of the Cryptid by State, and then I just asked everyone if they want me to do the territories with that, and they do. And I have my Cryptid by region that I'm doing, and everything else in between. I'm going to be doing a real versus real about ghost thing here coming up, which is where I look at stuff that's in the news, like videos and stuff that for example, remember when everyone was showing that where they were calling it a rake attacking a moose or something like that, and it was just a smudge in the window. So that's what my videos are about, where it's looking at the stuff people believe in, and it's seeing if it's real or not.
Yeah, to see whether or not it's real. Yeah, that's interesting. What else? So for the viewers who might not know, what's the name of your YouTube channel,
Ben Miller,
Ben Miller? And then
not to be confused with the actor or the band.
okay, yeah, Ben Miller, yeah.
Well, there's a Bennett Miller that played like Doctor Who or Death in Paradise or something. He's British.
Oh, okay. Okay, so now I think I ran across something called Ice Wolf
Yeah.
video. So is that yours as well?
Yeah, I originally started with making it Ice Wolf videos, and I forget what really made me make the switch. Because I think it was because, well, Ben Miller doesn't say paranormal, but I didn't really feel Ice Wolf videos spoke paranormal, and not to mention I kind of wanted to make my own brand, but I've kind of removed Ice Wolf videos. Like I see the picture you have for my thumbnails and I don't even use that anymore, but I still like to have it for all those places that say, what's your company? And I can say Ice Wolf videos,
So let's, I watched the one video you did on law enforcement interactions with ghostly images. I found that to be interesting. Why don't you talk about a couple of the stories that you featured in that video, and that'll get us kind of started down this path of law enforcement and the supernatural paranormal.
Okay. Well, I mean, the thing is that because I've covered multiple things along that lines, maybe not directly with that. I mean, because you have the famous 2 UFOs encounters, from police officers, but within that, what to be Val Johnson and Lonnie Zamora. But as far as the ghost encounters, the one I recall the most was that there was a police officer, and I can't say it in verbatim, but I remember the story was that this police officer was driving down the road, dirt road, and all of a sudden he felt like he had to go to the bathroom. Well, being out in the country, he just pulled over, and while he's sitting there, taking care of business, he happens to look up, and this is at night, and he sees this like figure of a person standing behind his car or in front of his car. It must have been in front for the headlights to hit it. And so he's watching this thing, and he even starts talking to it, saying, asking who it is, tell him to come forward, the typical thing a police officer would do if they're having something come up to them. and this thing never responded to him. And so he grabbed his flashlight and he shined it back there, and there was nothing there. And so then he decides, well, as most of us would, it's time to move on. He got in his car, and when he's looking in his mirror, there's that figure walking up to his car now. And so he left the scene. But another one that I don't think I covered, but there was a story about they were processing this guy that got into a fight. And as they were taking him into the jail cell, the police officer happened to look in one of the cells, and he saw this guy with like a buzz cut and a white shirt and glasses standing there. And he didn't think anything of it, but he put the other guy into the cell and, walked back. And, when they were looking over their paperwork, he happened to look up that cell number, and there was no one there. And so they started freaking out because obviously they're missing a prisoner. And so they went over all their records. They went to see if there was someone that, another agency that came and picked this guy up, and there hadn't been. And so then they decided to go to their cameras to see if they, to look at the recordings. And when they looked back at it, the guy was there, but then as they're watching it, he kind of fades out of sight out of nowhere. And when they tried to transfer this video, apparently, I mean, this makes it convenient, but I typically trust what the police officers are going to say about this, because talking about paranormal is kind of career suicide, but especially in those kind of things. But when they try to transfer it to like a thumb drive or something digital, that part of the video never wanted to go through. And they even said that, after that, they had all kinds of problems in the jail cell with hearing people talking, walking around, and other inmates even saying they saw this guy as well, but they never knew who this person actually was. But yeah, I did see another one. Because I knew you were going to plan this for the video today. I saw one that was really weird, and you take it for what it is, and that's what goes with most ghost stories. And I would like to talk about that eventually, but this one cop said that he was working in the street, and he happened to look down this one alley. He got a call out on a call, and there was some woman with black hair. I think she had a black dress on. Thankfully, it wasn't the characteristic woman in white. But he looked down this alley, and she was standing like a couple block, a block down. And so he decided, it was snowy out, and he thought, well, I'll get my car and I'll cruise around the block, and I'll come back around and see if she's all right. But as he's watching, she goes down this little doorway area, and he thought, he knows it was locked and everything. So he swings around and he walks up there, and the door is locked. There's no one, there. But there's a cat sitting there, and it's sitting there and rubs its head on him and then walks away. Well, apparently he realized that, being that there was snow, there was no other footprints in the snow but his, including the cat's wasn't there. And when he went back to dispatch and talked to them about it, apparently this was something that people have been reporting for a while, that this woman apparently shows up every so often. And I thought that was pretty freaky. But yeah, like I said, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, did you get these reports from the people who actually experienced it, or was it kind of a secondhand story that you were told?
Oh, that's the secondhand I was told.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting. And Dave, I feel like I'm monopolizing Ben here too much, so feel free to jump in whenever you want to.
Well, can I mention something real quick though?
Yeah.
Because it was about ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
I typically don't cover ghost topics, and like I said, I was just talking to my parents today, in relation to the show, and not your show, but this one today, because I know you were interested in ghosts. And they said something that was very poignant and I never thought about it this way, is that the problem with ghost stuff is none of them are, how do I put this? No matter how good the evidence is or video you see, you always can find a way to debunk it, you know?
Mhm.
And like they said, oh, there isn't any videos that show a real good ghost. And I said, I think there is, because some of the stuff looks really weird and you can hear people's reactions when this is going on. But they're right, is that, I mean, all of us have watched these videos, and I guarantee you somewhere along the lines, you're like, well, they could have done that with a string, or they could have done this with this. And I think that's the problem with ghost videos, and I mean, I love ghost stuff. I don't even believe in ghosts. I know they exist, but I get where people, because from what I've found, there isn't a lot of interest in ghosts, it seems. Aliens and cryptids, yes, but I think the problem is with ghosts is that they're too easy to question, I guess it would be.
Yeah, and in this day of Photoshop, it's so easy to make things that look real. I mean,
Absolutely.
especially a ghost too, which is expected to look ghostly. It looks like an apparition, like a double exposure, like a light anomaly or something. It's so you can call anything a ghost that may be just a photographic anomaly or some photoshopping thing, which is why this era is very challenging for a lot of these paranormal phenomena. UFOs, it's like I don't trust a UFO picture that was made after 1992 or something, because there's some great CGI out there. Things are getting more and more realistic to fake. Unfortunately, all this deep faking, making presidents say certain things that they never said or whatever. I mean, we live in an era where computers have really, they become more prevalent, more common, of course, vastly more common. Everyone has a cell phone, but it seems like we still don't have good evidence, like you're saying, especially of ghosts, but even of these other things. You think everyone has a cell phone at the ready. So why aren't we inundated with great pieces of evidence? But I also agree, you said there are good pictures of all these things, but it's so hard to tell if we should believe them or not, because we're so wary about fakery. So it comes down to, and I wanted to just touch on this because you're talking about the law enforcement, policemen, firemen, military reports. We're down to the point where we're back to trusting the witness, not the physical evidence or the alleged physical evidence.
Right.
You have to trust you inherently trust a police officer more, or a military, a pilot or something, because they have a lot more to lose if they're just faking, they're making stuff up, and they're much less likely to make errors in judgment or make mistakes about visual phenomena. So it's kind of ironic, I think, that we're heading back to, now we've got to trust the witnesses. We can't trust the photographs anymore. Anyway, so it's an interesting change in how we're viewing things, but I think it's smart to focus on the law enforcement aspect whether you're talking UFOs or cryptids or ghosts, and I would assume that law enforcement sees a lot of weird stuff because they're called to check out weird stuff. They're in areas of great emotional distress, which has been linked to some of these paranormal phenomena also. So they might be in a really good, unique position to provide good evidence too. So that's why I really, wanted to have you on the show, is to kind of talk about that. And the last thing is, you mentioned the Zamora case.
Okay.
I've read about it. It's been a while, so I have to admit my memory of the details is sketchy. So I wonder if you could touch on that at some point here. We don't have to do that exactly right now, but so there you go, Dan. I monopolized for a couple minutes, but that was in my head. I'd like to talk about the what's his Lonnie? It
was Lonnie. Lonnie.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right. Lonnie Zamora. So Zamora was a very extensive case. I extensively researched. But anyway, let's go where you want to go, Ben.
Well, I did want to say that you had mentioned about, trusting the witnesses.
Yeah.
And, with this recent UFO meeting that they had,
Oh, yeah.
one of the few things that came out of it that were good was that they said, if it's to be believed, they could be telling us what we want to hear, but they said that they want pilots to actually come forward and say what they're seeing out there. They're encouraging it, whereas before, like I said, with like police officers and stuff, and you were kind of touching on, that's not good for your career normally. You're grounded if you're a pilot, you're off the force if you're a police.
Exactly. And there was a directive, I can't remember the exact number, that exposed pilots to fines if they talked about things. Of course, it was under the guise of national security or whatever, but it threatened them monetarily, career-wise, as well as the whole stigma of saying, I saw a UFO when I was up there, and you're instantly a questionable witness just because you're saying what you saw. But there were monetary penalties also. So I wonder if that's true. Has any of that changed? I have to admit, I didn't pay much attention to this latest bit of disclosure in quotes, because I thought it would be just like Blue Book and everything else before it, which is just a PR exercise. But I know there were a couple gems in there. So do you think that's one of them that came out of that hearing?
I would like to believe that, but like you were kind of touching on, it does make me nervous that, they're saying this, for like the pilots to come forward. They're saying this, but is that actually what's happening in practice?
Yeah.
Are they telling everyone, oh, we want these pilots to come forward, but in the background, after the cameras are off, they're saying, don't be bringing any of this.
Better not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other little nugget that was in there that not a lot of people caught was that they tried to say that there was all these reports of UFOs and 11 near misses from, with pilots. And they said they don't know what they are. And they said that, until our science can advance, we don't have an explanation for them. But that at the same time, they said, but they're not alien. And it's like, well, and because they had a ranking system of like 5 different ranks, much like Project Blue Book did, they had their ranking system of like, weather balloons or even secret projects or all this other stuff. And the last one was other. And that's where it said that we don't understand what it is, Well, in that, with them saying that, being that they already had the secret projects in there as a category, because they didn't mention which ones were secret projects, so they didn't have anything to hide. They could say all 10 of them were, but none of us know which 10, but within that, there was a other category that it's like, well, even though they said they're not alien, they very well may be.
Well, and in that category, as in Blue Book and the Condon Report and all these other, over the years, these basically whitewash operations. I mean, the scientific logical thing is that you go through 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're all mundane sightings of the planet Venus or whatever. Get rid of those. Don't waste an ounce of time after you identify it, and start with the level 5s. Start with the weird stuff. But they didn't start with it. They ended it there. They said, well, we don't have enough information so we're just going to lump them into some category as unidentified, which of course the supporters said unidentified means alien or potentially something very explosive and interesting. And then the scientists were able to say, well, that just means we didn't have enough data to call it a weather balloon or something. So the investigations, of course, by design, stopped at the most interesting part. And that's always the most frustrating thing about these sorts of official investigations, that is they get to a point and then they stop. They don't devote any resources to it. Of course, what they really do, as we know, is they probably take it black, or they've already figured it out and they're just not going to include the interesting part by default. But again, having credible witnesses is a huge part of any investigation. Our entire, judicial system is based on, it's the majority of it is witness testimony. You don't have a smoking gun in most cases. You just have people saying one thing and other people saying the other, and the jury tries to figure out what's truth. So
Right.
to say we don't have enough evidence, well, I mean, the testimony itself is compelling evidence. You just have to listen to it and weigh it carefully and objectively, and not dismiss it from the beginning, which is typically what happens. So again, police officers, military, very important.
Well, you remember what they did with Project Blue Book. They didn't even do investigations near the end.
Yeah.
They literally sat down and said, okay, didn't even go out and look at it. They said, okay, anything that's unknown, we're dropping it down 2 tiers.
Yeah, with the assumption that it would, with more information, it would be discovered to be a mundane, prosaic, whatever term they use.
I think they just don't want to admit it. The thing that I find always fascinating, though, and I will say this, because I guarantee that a lot of the UFOs that people see are probably military secret projects.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was, well, as they put it, is a Marine. He was, but he worked in where they dealt with secrets and stuff, and he always raised us to believe that anything they're willing to tell you about is already outdated.
Yeah.
So like, what was it? They always denied that the railgun existed, and then all of a sudden there it is, full production, and now it's already abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
So it means that there's something more, but that also comes into a bunch of other aspects that I'm sure you don't want to spend all your time about UFOs.
Well, we could, I'm sure, but it all ties together, though. That's the important thing, is that, like you're talking about, things go black, things get lost in the labyrinth of military industrial complex. The really cool, important things go into corporate, private entities. They don't stay in government anyway, but there is this mix of the 18 intelligence agencies, or whatever it's up to these days, and corporate America. Therefore it can be categorized as proprietary and out of the public domain, away from the Freedom of Information Act and all those other things. Of course, that's all by design.
Right.
And it leaves a lot of the military people out of the loop too, because they don't have access to, Elon Musk's private data or whatever. Not to pick on Elon, but it only makes sense that that's where things end up, in defense contractors' warehouses somewhere.
I think the most interesting thing, not to jump in there, but I think the most interesting thing I ever saw was, the Roswell incident. Was, if you actually look into that, we went from prop airplanes to jets, like right after that. But the biggest interesting thing that isn't even hidden is that at that same time, there were 3 different facilities, I believe, in 3 different countries, all trying to patent a laser at the same time. Immediately after. And it's like, what's the chances of all 3, at the same time? So
there was a huge leap in technological
right
advancement right into the computer age at that time. So
it seems like we've stalled, to be honest with you.
Yeah, if I mean, let's see. Can you tie together some of these things? I know we always talk about Dan. Dan is really into the cryptid aspect of things, and I'm into the more of the techie stuff, because I'm a geek, which I fully admit. But I like the UFOs, and I like the new energy machines, and the technological aspect, computers and all that. And right. Dan was always trying to convince me that Bigfoot was a supernatural being, or that Bigfoot was somehow tied in with UFOs and
right
could time travel, or whatever.
Interdimensional.
I would always say, nah, he's just a big hairy ape that's been around. But I have to admit, Dan, working on me for so many years, he's helped me turn the corner. And so I do see connections between all of those subjects. So I'm wondering, how do you tie together, these various areas that you're interested into? How do you tie them together? Do you see a common link between them?
as far as like UFOs and stuff, or with
No,
cryptids,
I mean,
UFOs?
do they arise from a similar source? I mean, is it interdimensional? Does Bigfoot get a ride in a UFO on occasion and do errands for the alien? I mean, how deep into that rabbit hole do you personally dive?
Well, I go on record as saying that I personally believe in about 5 cryptids.
Okay.
You know, I appreciate, I appreciate the stories. You know, I'm not saying that other ones are fake, but the main ones that I believe in, the evidence is too, prominent. And Bigfoot definitely is one of them. It's Bigfoot, Nessie, Mothman, Jersey Devil, and Chupacabra. That's the top 5. And I definitely agree with Dan that it's that Bigfoot has been seen a couple of times with alien entities coming from a UFO. And while you were talking, I was trying to find the video I made where there was reports of people seeing a Bigfoot and leaving a portal. And this was an old report where I'm sure portals weren't even a thought, and I was trying to find it real quick. I found the thumbnail, but I never have them labeled right. And so, but I think it's Spotsburg or Spotselberg or something like that. And as far as like my all-time favorite, Mothman, I believe they're an interdimensional species, but I don't believe that they're here to cause trouble. So I do see a lot of the cryptids possibly being extraterrestrial or interdimensional, I'd be more apt to say. But I mean, it only explains, or should I say, it explains a lot when it comes to Bigfoot. Like, where are the bodies? Why, so many people is out in the woods and never sees it, they have to have some place to be. Although in the same aspect, coming from Pennsylvania, we go out, well, I don't hunt, but when I did, you would see deer all the time until it was hunting season. And then you never see one, And so, well, even, for me, I grew up this area all my life and I've seen maybe 2 black bear. And so that tells you that they hide pretty well, And so if it's something even less like a Bigfoot and, less population, then I can definitely see them being able to do whatever they need to do. But I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, I've heard the argument that in the Pacific Northwest forest, Dan and I live right in the middle of it.
Okay.
Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Northern California. Of course, there's there've been something like 40 small small aircraft that have crashed and never been recovered. And so I use that as an argument when people say, well, why don't we ever find, why don't hunters find Bigfoot? Well, first of all, they're very smart. We know that. They know how to hide. They've been surviving there. They know all the places they can be quiet when they're smart. They can hide. How smart is a deer? Well, relative to Bigfoot, probably not very smart, but it's their habitat. They know how to stay safe as safe as they can stay. But if you can lose 40 aircraft with search and rescue teams, combing through trees for days and never finding them, then of course a small family of Bigfoot, big feet, Sasquatch can evade attention and detection. But again, that isn't really, my question was, do you see a link between these other paranormal phenomena and Sasquatch? And I think you answered it in the affirmative, saying that they potentially could be interdimensional. They maybe live in this realm where these other things sometimes dwell, at least. I think the theory on aliens, of course, is that they're interdimensional, not coming from a planet around Zeta Reticuli or something. So yeah, that answered the question. That seems to be the conclusion of most guests we have, not on purpose. We don't seek guests out with that similar viewpoint, but it seems when you've been looking at this stuff for long enough, that's where you inevitably you end up, because it's the thing that ties everything together. So that was my question, but I'll let Dan go on, and maybe he wants to talk about Mothman or something, because that's one of Dan's all-time favorites, I know.
Well, I do want to say one real quick thing, because I'm always on board for talking about Mothman. But I do want to say, as far as that, I've recently come with a theory when it comes to ghosts and spirits, that I believe they're in that same plane of existence. Because I have a couple ghost hunter friends that, I recently had a conversation with them that really kind of piqued my interest to that theory. That he said he walked into this one building and they saw this ghost, and all of a sudden it tore out of the room, terrified at the sight of him. And it came to the theory that maybe in that spirit's realm, this guy I knew was the ghost,
Mhm.
And so I believe it's possible that, however you believe that ghosts happen, that they might be in that different little realm that's there. And when we see a lot of people have theorized when it comes to cryptids, that it's like our reality blending with theirs. That's the theory,
Yeah.
But I just appreciate them for what they are, and especially Mothman.
What, as I'm listening to this conversation, the tendency is to want to go in about 58 different directions.
Right.
Because it's so, which brings up, I think, the point that Dave is trying to make is that how much of this stuff is interconnected. So we've never done a show on the Skinwalker Ranch, but we did a show with Katie Grabowski, who's head of MUFON in Colorado, and she grew up on a place. I think, where is that, Dave? Kiowa, Colorado? I think that's the little town she grew up in.
Yeah.
But that sounds like a Skinwalker Ranch. They've got cryptids, they've got UFOs, they've got poltergeist activity.
Right.
We also did a show with another guest who lives here in Washington, and she's got the same kind of thing going on. So what I start wondering about is the interrelatedness of all this kind of stuff. And we tend to put things in separate categories. Well, this is obviously a ghost kind of a thing. And then somebody say, well, no, this has to do with cryptids. But I'm wondering to what extent that it's not all interrelated. And that's what this conversation is causing me to want to talk about.
Well, I do want to first say that I'm pretty upset that I missed my opportunity to make a Skinwalker Ranch video.
Mhm.
Because once they came out with the show, it was, what do I have to say?
Well, what
You've been
I'll
scooped.
throw out something to you, though, Ben.
Right.
Maybe the Skinwalker Ranch is covered territory, so to speak. It's been copyrighted or whatever, but we could probably steer you toward two other properties that would be equally as weird,
Oh,
and that would make for dang good videos. So don't feel like you've lost your opportunity there.
well, see, you know, this whole process is a learning experience, because as all of us know, we don't know everything that there is. But anytime that someone, in my audience for so long were saying, oh, you need to do Skinwalker Ranch, Skinwalker Ranch. And I assumed that's all it was. I assumed that, because I didn't know much about it. And I assumed it was just about skinwalkers. Well, I didn't know it was all these UFOs and, all this other activity that was going on. And so, yeah, I would love to hear these other two properties.
Well, your favorite cryptid, like mine, is Mothman. And
Yeah.
if you go down that rabbit hole far enough, you'll find out that it wasn't just Mothman that showed up in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966. It was all this other weird stuff, including Men in Black. So
Yes.
John Keel, who wrote about the Mothman, he came up with this idea of window areas. And what he said was, those are just interdimensional places on the earth. And I'm thinking of Skinwalker Ranch. I'm thinking of this ranch in Colorado and this ranch in Washington State, where just all kinds of weird crap comes through. And it's all separate, but it's also related too. So I think that's an idea that I have become fonder of as the more information I found out about.
Well, I do want to ask real quick, is that are you real fond of John Kill?
Uh, that's a good question. I respect Keel. Um, he just
And
had a
our
point of
guest,
view.
we had a guest,
Yeah, Bill Grabowski.
uh, um, yeah, it was Bill too. Yeah.
But I wasn't
Pretty
John Kill the one?
agnostic. He was an agnostic. I mean, as far as what was happening, right?
He thought it could have been a psyops
Yeah,
kind of thing, rather than some straight. And I'm talking particularly about Mothman. He
Hmm.
wasn't sure that was not some reaction to a government-sponsored psyops program, or even some reaction to some of the chemicals stored in the TNT
Right.
area in Point Pleasant. So, you know, everybody's got an opinion, but the question is, what's the truth? And that's the tough one to get to.
Well, I thought John Kill was the one that went on record of he really didn't believe in any of this stuff, and he made us his words was kooky books. Wasn't that the same person?
I don't the things I've read in the Mothman prophecies and the other stuff I've been exposed to is Keel. I think he was into this idea of window areas,
Mm.
that there were just really weird dimensional things out there, and every once in a while, whether it be in Point Pleasant or someplace else, some of all this stuff come together. And they say in Point Pleasant that they haven't had any Mothman sightings since 1967 when the Silver Bridge collapsed. Well, that's not true,
Right.
because there are ongoing Mothman sightings, not only there, but in the Chicago area. So once again, more mysteries than answers.
Well, I did want to mention that because you were saying about these the psyops or whatever it is,
Yeah.
was that we actually enjoy the uh Skinwalker Ranch program that's on TV. I appreciate the scientific attempt if it's actually believable. But we started watching because my father-in-law mentioned that Blind Frog Ranch one where they're looking for gold.
Right.
And they said even though the whole thing seems to be put on, they kind of said a throwaway line, and one of the witnesses they talked to who said that Skinwalker Ranch was always thought to be like a program that the government was running to like make people hallucinate.
Hmm.
And they mentioned that like just like I'm telling it to you, and just passed by it, and it was like, huh, I wonder if that's what's really going on.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's what, the Mothman thing, that what freaked me out, and I've told Dan this before, was not necessarily that there was this moth creature, that evil looking,
Mm.
scary creature. It was the weird stuff that went along with it, like the phone calls with the odd
Guys, stuff.
knocking or tapping and or tones, beeping. I mean, it was weird psychological stuff that just messed with your mind. At least it messed with my mind. And that kind of does fall into the category of psyops or some sort of experiment. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if some of these areas, these vortexes, so to speak, are places where you can play around with reality and test humans' reactions to them. So it's not really mutually exclusive. It may be a vortex of weird stuff, but it may also be where the evil scientists are, attracted to as a laboratory that's ripe for these kind of sociopathic experiences. So, or experiments, I mean, experience on the part of the people who are unfortunate enough to be in it. So none of this is mutually exclusive, which is another huge frustration in these fields, because anything can be a possibility when it comes down to it. So,
well, as I'm sitting here listening to you talk,
I think
I was thinking that if you're familiar with the Glimmer Man, I've honestly wondered if it isn't the same as the Mothman, but a different
I
version.
don't know about that. What's Glimmer?
It's basically, I know Dan probably knows about it, but it's basically looks like the Predator, where it's had, how the Predator looked with the cloaking device, and it has the yellow eyes and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been many reports of people seeing it. It was even shown in that, what was it, Missing 411 Hunted. The woman claims she saw one there. And I wondered if they're not tied together also, because no one's ever seen it uncloaked, and it obviously is. But then that also brings in the Manus Man alien. So
Mhm.
You can go down, like Dan was saying, you can go down all kind of avenues with this. And I'm sure you know about Glimmer Man, right, Dan?
Yeah, not as well as maybe Mothman, but I've certainly heard of it. So I want to take us back one spot here, and doesn't have anything to do with law enforcement. Well, it does have something to do with law enforcement encounters. Ben mentioned Lonnie Zamora, so I've always found that to be an interesting case. Lonnie, share what you or Ben share what you know about Lonnie Zamora's case and why you think that was important.
Well, like I said, there's two that was important. It was Lonnie and it was Val Johnson. And but with Lonnie's, like I said, the details are really hazy, but if I remember correctly, he was reporting to what he thought was a fire out in the desert, if I remember correctly. And when he
An
went out there,
explosion,
what was
some
that?
kind of explosion. I think he thought that there was an explosion at
Right.
some kind of facility.
And so he went out there and he come across this strange craft, like an egg-shaped craft, and it had like strange red symbols on the side of it. And I believe he saw two or three people in suits milling around it. And then at one point they got in and it took off and it let out this big burst of fire, which is that's the only thing of the story that's weird, because most UFOs don't do that. They don't have the fire propulsion. But it left this big ring, which has been photographed and everything. And I've seen people trying to debunk what he saw, but as like a secret project, and it very well could be. But Lonnie was very adamant that this was actually happening, and I have no reason to not believe. He had like we've been saying this whole program, he stood everything to lose and nothing to gain.
Yeah, and it
But
kind of ruined his life too, didn't it?
yeah.
Just,
Well, the same with like Val Johnson, the one that got the UFO hit his car supposedly, and they still have that car.
Tell me about that case. I'm not as familiar with that case as the Zamora case.
If I remember correctly, he was driving down the road. I think he was actually tailing someone who was going to pull him over. And then all of a sudden he saw this flash of light, and out of nowhere it hit his car and it actually knocked him unconscious. And at one point when he wakes back up, he's sitting there radioing back in. And I think I heard the tapes of it, and he was sounding really groggy and everything. And whatever hit him left this big mark on his car and bent his antenna at a 45-degree angle or 90-degree angle, perfectly. His radio wasn't working. His watch had stopped at the time it happened. And there's been no explanation of what all went on. And I think that there was actually, they did tests on him and he had signs of radiation, which, like we were saying about the UFO report meeting they just had, that was brought up also, that a lot of these have seen radiation involved. So, yeah.
Where did that happen, Ben?
Was it New Mexico?
I know that's where Zamora was, but I'm not familiar with the other case.
Let me, because I'm on my computer. Let me look at it real quick.
I have read about that, but I have to admit I don't remember the details either. But that's something that's kind of a no-brainer to investigate. You would think you have physical evidence, you have a reliable witness with health issues that are a direct result. You have a car that's dented that you can test the paint samples. You can do so much with something like that.
It was Minnesota, by the way.
Minnesota. Okay.
In 79. It was actually the deputy sheriff.
So
So
I want to interject one other thing about witnesses here. And because Ben touched on it in his the YouTube video that I listened to when he talked about law enforcement folks and them being usually thought of as being stellar witnesses, but then there was kind of a caveat to that. I want Ben to talk a little bit about that, and then I've got kind of a story to share about that. So, Ben, as I recall, you thought that maybe law enforcement folks weren't quite as good at witnesses to some of this paranormal stuff as might be expected. Was that accurate?
Well, within any kind of, we're all human,
Yeah.
and when it just because you have a badge in a gun, I hate to say that like that, but just because you have a bad in your gun doesn't make you any better than most people necessarily, and but outside of all that, I mean, like I said, started this with is we're all human. And as you well know, being in that field, all kinds of stresses and pressures are put on you. And who's to say what's actually there and what could be even a PTSD situation or just from everything else going on? Because a lot of sightings happen after something else has went on. Like I said, that story I told you about the ghost woman and the cat down the alley, that was after reporting to a call, and so while I'm not going to say that for the most part that they're going to sit there and lie about it, because as we've discussed, that's not good for the career typically. That's not always saying that your mind can't play a lot of tricks on you as well. So just because you have a badge, it doesn't change how your mind works,
So
That's all I'm saying.
Here's my little story. So for a while, I practiced corrections in law enforcement, and then because that became kind of dangerous, I
Mm.
decided I would teach about that. And I was a community college teacher for 16 years. I used to teach criminology, and one of the famous stories that I recounted in class was, and you couldn't do this today because it'd be highly unethical, but it looked at this idea of what witnesses perceive and what they don't perceive. So the story goes that this professor who was teaching a criminology class is going on with a class of 50 or 60 students talking about this, that, or the other thing. The door opens, someone walks into the classroom, levels a gun at this guy, fires the gun, and then runs out of the classroom. And the professor slumps over. And the students are just totally aghast. And then the professor gets up. No big deal. Nothing happened.
Mm.
Then he asked the interesting question: what did the assailant, the person who fired the gun, what did they look like? Can you imagine what kind of answers he got? Well, they were male. No, they were female. No, they were tall. No, they were short. They were African American. They were, so the point being is that that was such a traumatic event
Mm.
that people had trouble processing it and coming up with accurate witness descriptions. So Ben was just talking about the effects of the paranormal, PTSD on something like that. So compound natural human ineptitude when it comes to reporting what they've seen with something, like seeing Bigfoot for the first time. And it makes you wonder about how accurate any witness testimony would be.
Well, that's where you even typically see like you see this a lot when it comes to sea monster or lake monster sightings, where the range is always it was between 10 and 30 feet. That's a massive range, so it's everything's, and you also see that as time goes, and this goes with everything, it gets bigger, it gets smaller, it grows horns, it has red eyes, it all everything kind of gets blurred, kind of like the story you were just saying. And it makes everything real tough, but I do want to say I have no disrespect against the police. I believe they're doing what they need to do. So
Yeah,
We
police.
need laws to be enforced. People aren't, too many people are not willing to abide by the rules of society, as we found out recently. So we've had Ben on here for about an hour and 15 minutes. I don't want to have him feel like he's part of an alien abduction experience.
I love
So
talking about this stuff.
we do too, but we feel like people have other things to do in their life. So is there any final thing you want to share with us, Ben or Dave? Do you have anything you want to ask Ben? And then if not, I've got a proposition for Ben. So we'll hear from you guys from first.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many different directions to go, even from here. I guess one general one for Ben is that do you see progress towards sort of unraveling some of these mysteries? Are there certain areas where you're feeling like we're making some real headway into understanding this? Are there any areas that you feel that way, or do you feel like we're just as lost as we were in the beginning?
Well, like I said, I just made the video about the UFO conference, And I believe I even stated in there that it feels like we're kind of reverting back.
Mhm.
We're, even though we're having this stuff being said, we're still having those little caveats thrown in there. Well, it's not alien, but we don't know what it is,
Mhm.
and it feels like they're reverting back to those polls they did back in the 40s or 50s, where people said they'd be terrified if they saw a UFO. And I believe that nowadays, well, it still would be terrifying to realize that there's a technology that can come here and we can't,
Yeah.
I think people will be more accepting of it. But, just when you think you're going to make a couple steps forward, it seems like we go right back. The only thing I can say is that I was happy to see that more people believe in UFOs than used to, it is, and
Yeah.
the other side of it is that is a benefit is, UFOs, the paranormal, cryptids, that used to be all stuff you talked about, you know, in private company and like a taboo topic, where now it's commonplace. Even in the construction trade, I've talked to people because they know I have a channel, and
Mhm.
I've had a few of them say, "Oh, I don't believe in, Bigfoot or anything like that," and then immediately after they'll say, "Oh, but I do believe in UFOs,"
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and it's like, wow, we wouldn't have this conversation 20 years ago,
Yeah.
That's for sure.
so that's a definite we're forward progress. I mean, we'll never get full disclosure unless there's a mothership above us, and
Yeah.
even then it'll be claimed to be a cloud. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but as far as the public's view of it, I do believe it's changed in a positive way.
Yeah. I think we'd agree on that. It's just for those of us who want to move forward quickly, it's like time release aspirin, it's just over time, a little few molecules here and there in the bloodstream of, humanity.
Right.
You want to just get the full pain relief right now, or if it's going to be painful, let's just get it going and get over it. But I completely understand the motivation from the top, from the government at any level, is that you don't want to rip the band-aid off. You want to make it as smooth as possible for your own career's sake, mostly. Unfortunately, or you want to be out of office by the time the big truth comes out, so you don't have to be the one going, well, yeah, we lied to you for 6, 7, 8 decades, but
Sorry.
yeah, sorry about that. So I totally get that, but I agree that we're having some small, it's just very, very small incremental change. Maybe we'll hit a crucial, critical mass when something big will change or will happen. But I agree with you totally, Ben, that we'll never get full disclosure. It's not going to come from any official source. It's just going to come from enough people saying, okay, this is real. Let's do something about it.
Right. I mean, I know you guys are wanting to close down here, but it's like the whole story of Bob Lazar. They did everything to that man but kill him.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff. I even saw an article just this week where they were defending, the critics' view of what he said, and about, well, yeah, he did bring up that element that didn't exist at the time. Well, it does now.
Yeah.
But that it's not the same. And it's like, but still, he said it, and then they throw him in for what, fireworks and a prostitution ring, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
ruin a man's career, his life, marriage, did everything but kill him. Outside of Phil Schneider, they did him, but
I think Lazar will have the last laugh. He's still going strong. I mean, I saw something about the device. Did you see that, Ben? You put your hand in it or something as an identification device, that he said, well, this is what we used to go into this clearance area, or something. Was it, I don't think it was related to the ship, but it was some device that people are like, that doesn't exist. And then decades later, he finds the exact thing that he described. He said, well, here's the thing, now we have physical evidence of this, and it matched his description. So I think Lazar is one of those few who's just been so so determined to just stick to his story, that over time things corroborate his view of events. And yeah, I think he was attacked relentlessly by the powers that be to discredit him. So we need more people like him who just stick with their story through the decades. And
But he was smart, because if you remember when he first came out, he hid his identity, and then he realized that was more dangerous than people
Yeah.
knowing who was.
Yeah.
It's harder to get rid of somebody that everyone knows. So,
True.
you know, and not long after that, he dropped the whole "no one knows who I am." So he got himself out there, but so they couldn't handle him, dare I say, the way they'd like to. But yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything about that device. I'll have to look it up.
Oh, I can't remember where I saw that, but it was pretty amazing. He said, here's he had described it in his writing decades ago, and here was the thing. It was discovered in some warehouse or some, secondhand play. I don't remember exactly what the story was, but it was amazing. It was physical evidence, very compelling.
Out of curiosity, did he always say that he worked in 51, or did he say he worked in Dulce as well? With like the Nightmare Hall.
S4, or yeah, they're different. There were some.
Well, I know Phil said about working in a Nightmare Hall in Dulce, but I don't know if
he was very consistent in what he said, and his story was twisted, over the.
Oh, I believe what Bob said. I'm just curious if he ever said he worked elsewhere.
Yeah, I don't remember that part. Yeah, I mean, it'd be fun to have an expert on the Bob Lazar story. That could take a whole hour and a half, or if you want to get into that some other time, because he's a whole show unto himself.
Absolutely.
Well, speaking of other times, I'm going to come up with this proposition here for.
Oh, that's right.
All right.
Because I really want to thank you for coming on with us and putting up with barking dogs and technology that doesn't work and all that kind of stuff. But two things. I would really, and I'm sure I'm speaking for Dave here to some degree, and if I'm not, he would tell me so. I really like to have you as a reoccurring guest on Anomalies. And we do have the next show we're going to do. Well, not the next one, but coming up, we do have repeat guests. But I think it would be really interesting to have you on. We're not going to do some shows in July and August. We're going to take kind of a break. But in September, I think it'd be really cool if you had the time to come on maybe once a month and do just a little show about. I enjoyed your cryptids of all the different states. So I grew up in Idaho, so I listened to that one. Of course, we live in Washington State, which has its share of cryptids. So one thing would be an offer for you to come back and do a kind of a repeat guest kind of thing once a month or whatever it works out to, and you can highlight some of the cryptid stories. So mull that over in your mind. And then the other offer is, and this is associated with Facebook, Dave and I belong to something called the Olympian 14 Society, and we're almost looking for 14 researchers, and you kind of sound like one. So we might send you an invitation to join our group.
I'd be honored.
Yeah. No commitment or anything. Just part of another group, a bunch of people who are interested in the weird. But
you never know what you're going to find.
But that's how you get exposed to different things that you never thought. Like, and it makes you go back and look over, like you said, the Zamora case, and now was it Val Johnson? I'm going to go look back through. I think I have Timothy Good's Above Top Secret, which is one of the first books I ever read that sent me careening down this rabbit hole, and I think he discussed these famous cases, but I really want to revisit. But that's what it does, talking with people about this. It makes you remember the cases that got you interested in this in the first place.
Chariots of the Gods wasn't the first one you read?
Actually, no. The first was the UFO Experience by J. Allen Hynek. I saw that in a Bruised Books, I think it was, in Eastern Washington. It was like $1, and I laughed at it at first. I went, "What is that?" I started reading it, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is real." This is a real scientist with real numbers and that sent me off. But yeah, everyone has a seminal, exposure to something or experience. And it's fun to look back on that and kind of trace your path into the weird and bizarre.
The thing I find so funny is that kind of like what you said is that I've always had experiences with, I mean, I have more often than not, I have experience with ghosts, but I had a couple cryptid sightings. But
Mhm.
now my dad and everyone in like his bloodline of that, from previous to him, they see UFOs all the time. And I
Yeah.
don't see them all the time. He just saw one like a couple days ago,
Wow.
and the sad thing is that even though he knows what I do and how open things are,
Yeah.
I told him, I said, you need to report this sighting, that you had. And he refused.
Mm.
He contacted them. They said they wanted to talk to him.
Yeah.
And he said he wanted me to talk to him. And I was like, it's not my story. And
Yeah.
he said, well, I don't want to be ostracized,
Yep.
and it's like,
Well, it's understandable. Fortunately, that's still true, for the vast majority of people.
I
So
see Dan left us, huh?
I think Dan, speaking of going down a rabbit hole, I think Dan just left us. His internet probably cut off. He was having problems earlier. Anyway, Ben, I'll be the one to say thank you so much, and we'll be in touch with you and hopefully get a chance to chat. Whether it's about probably Dan calling me right now. We'll get a chance to chat, about cryptids or other things too. If if that fits into your schedule down the road, we'll look forward to that. So again, thank you, Ben Miller, for joining us today on Anomalies.
I appreciate it. It's been a good time.
Okay, we'll talk to you later then.
All righty.
Okay, bye.
Bye.